Welcome back. This is why we're calling it the retailer of last resort. The reality is, whether it's because of bad credit or they just can't afford it, many folks turn to places like RentACenter or other rent-to-own businesses to get TVs, refrigerators, and furniture. But as we just reported, there are accusations from consumers in Florida and across the nation of over-the-top collection practices and massive markups of items, and it's all legal. Joining us for more is Brian Oglesby of the Better Business Bureau and Jerry Zivick, our own consumer watchdog. And Brian, let me start with you. How many retailers like this are there in Florida?
Well, there's many different retailers in the rent-to-own industry, and there's hundreds of locations throughout the state of Florida that are out there offering these services to consumers. Now,
the investigation that we just showed you deals with RentACenter. Are there a lot of complaints about the tactics of this company at places from Sarasota and across the entire Tampa Bay area?
So complaints to the Better Business Bureau actually on RentACenter specific, we received over 1,400 complaints in the last 3 years. And there's actually an alert regarding a pattern of complaints in the BBB business profile.
That was my next question. What is the pattern?
So the pattern that we have here is specifically complaints received by the Better Business Bureau allege abusive, unfair, or deceptive collection practices executed by RentACenter employees.
Okay, so there were two issues that the investigation just covered. It was the collection practices and the cost of the appliances, the furniture itself. We're going to get to that in a second. Jerry, you watched this investigation. What were the first things that crossed your mind?
Well, number one, RentACenter does not have the right to breach the peace to enter the property, and they don't have the right to illegally enter the property. That's one of the Florida laws. So that disturbed me a great deal. It appeared that they were just disturbing the peace and harassing people.
So that raises an interesting question. If you are in that situation, what do you do?
I would call the police. In theory, the police are an honest broker here, and the police should not allow the RentACenter people to come repossess that to let them in, and the police should actually act as an agent to cause people to disengage on a situation like that.
And the truth of the matter is, a lot of folks, we don't want to generalize, but a lot of folks who go to RentACenter and other retailers like this are people who have no alternative if they need a television or an appliance in many cases.
Well, it's analogous to a pawn shop. The problem with RentACenter is it's a lease, not a loan. And loans are protected by federal laws. Leases are not. So that's where it gets a little dicey.
So we'll get into that more in our next segment, but there are less consumer protections as far as the state of Florida is concerned.
Well, but Florida does have a fair number. It has 14 requirements in the contract that help the consumer.
Like what?
Well, it's supposed to list the price of the item, when it's new, how much the ultimate payment would be. It's supposed to actually list what the percentage rate would be. It's supposed to list if it's newer users. There's just an endless list of requirements.
Okay, we are just getting warmed up, and we'll have much more on rent-to-own retailers right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about RentACenter and other rent-to-own retailers, and joining us for more is Brian Oglesby of the Better Business Bureau and Jerry Zivick, our own consumer watchdog. So we talked about some over-the-top collection practices in our last segment, but there is another issue that was in our investigation that is also incredible, and that is the markups. I mean, I looked at some of the prices on RentACenter's website locally and then compared it to, let's say, a refrigerator at Home Depot, same make, model number, and it was drastically more expensive. How often do you see this in terms of the complaints that come to the BBB?
Well, the markups are high, and that's their business model, and that's where consumers need to be aware of this. They need to know that if they're doing these weekly rentals and they add that up, it's going to be much higher than it is if they purchase at a retail store.
Jerry, is there any law on the state or federal level that limits how much you can mark up an item?
No, you can mark it up as much as you want, but in Florida you have to disclose how much it is initially, whether or not you're buying a used product or a new product. A lot of times you're buying used stuff and you think it's new. And if you want, and there has to be a disclosure in the contract, if you want to pay your contract off early, how they're going to calculate that payment instead of having to pay. A lot of times they front load charges if you want to pay it off early. And the Florida contract also requires delivery charges Any late payment fees are capped really at $5, and any other charges. So in theory, the whole Florida contract lays this all out. You have to be willing to take the time to read through it. The Florida actually requires it to be in 6-point type, so it's instead of that little print, that it's actually readable.
Brian, how often do you find by looking at the complaints on this particular retailer or others that the problem is that the consumer, the customer, has not really read or taken time to read the contracts that they're signing?
Well, it is common in complaints. Consumers do complain that they didn't understand the contract. In a lot of cases, too, what's told you verbally, you need to make sure is put in writing. We also have complaints where the salesperson told the consumer one thing, but when they went back to the contract, it wasn't there in writing. So consumers need to do their homework, they need to be diligent, and they need to approach this knowing what they're doing and making sure they're reviewing this information and researching these companies ahead of time so they're making informed decisions when they lease these.
Jerry, it seems from our investigation that there is a particular problem with this retailer, not just in Florida, but across the entire United States. Why isn't the Federal Trade Commission or other federal entity in a position to actually do something about it?
Well, they are in a position to do something. Take the situation with Aaron's Furniture.
That's another retailer.
Thank you. They were leasing computers and electronics, and they were putting software inside the computer that were tracking people's buying habits and who knows what else. So the FTC does have the right to look into this and do this, and why they're not, I don't know.
I have that FTC complaint right here. It's incredible. Aaron's franchisees use the software which surreptitiously tracked consumers' locations, captured images through the computer's webcams, and activated key foggers that captured users' log-on credentials for email accounts and financial and social media sites. That is flat out scary.
It is. And you know, where there's limitations on government regulation, that's where Better Business Bureau can be a great resource for consumers, because a lot of times we're on the front end receiving these complaints, these concerns from consumers, and we put that information out there in our business profiles on these companies. So the first step consumers should do is check companies out with the Better Business Bureau. Go online, add the word review or complaint after the company's name, see what other people are saying about those companies, and prepare yourself if you're going in there to know what you're dealing with those companies.
Now, we should make it clear the Better Business Bureau is not an arm of the government. You're not a law enforcement agency. But how aware is the, let's say, Florida Attorney General's office about these practices, and what can it do about it?
Well, I'm not sure how aware they are with it, but the Better Business Bureau has this information available to consumers when they need it, which is right now. So we have consumer experiences at their fingertips of what consumers are complaining to the Better Business Bureau about. We compile that data, and that helps consumers make informed decisions. Consumers also need to file complaints with the State Attorney General's office, the Federal Trade Commission, so that information is submitted. The more consumers present this to the right agencies, the more they can approach these agencies and crack down.
Well, that was my next question, Jerry. In terms of where we are right now, in terms of, you know, all arms of the government, whether it's state or federal, I mean, budgets are tight and oversight is limited. How on top is the Federal Trade Commission in terms of these companies, in terms of abuses, whether it's in terms of aggressive collections or incredible markups?
I don't think they're very on top at all. And I think, not to make a generalization, but a lot of times people that are using these types of rent-own places don't have a lot of resources. And people that don't have a lot of resources don't have a lot of political clout. And if you don't have a lot of political clout, are you going to get the government to respond? I don't think it will more often than not.
But I did talk to the Florida Attorney General's office, and they did have a considerable amount of cases or complaints against RentACenter. But are state agencies less powerful in terms of what it can do other than the federal government?
Well, I think they both have the power to actually put these people out of business or make it very difficult for them, but nobody's doing that.
Right. And Brian, so what would you tell customers here before they go out and they desperately need, whether it's a piece of furniture or an appliance or anything else, what to do before you sign on the dotted line, so to speak?
Yeah, I think the key here in this incident is consumers need to make informed decisions. They need to do their homework first. They need to do the research, and then they need to make sure what's told to them verbally is in the contract and in writing. This is an important scenario where they need to read that contract thoroughly and understand what they're getting into. And just being an educated consumer in this case and being prepared for these payments, know that you can make these payments on time, because this is a scenario where if they miss a payment, it can cost them a lot more money, and then they can't purchase the product that they wanted to.
And Jerry, I don't know if I asked this before, but is there a limitation in terms of how aggressively a collector can come in terms of trying to get that debt, even if it's like $60 or overpayment?
It can be $1, and if you breach your contract, you're at risk, but they can't break the law. They have to follow laws. And basically, I think all businesses would be better off if they just treated people the way they would want to be treated. And they knew the risks when they leased, and the person that leased knew the obligations when they did that.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts when we return. Our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And Jerry, I'm curious what your takeaway is. You know, the investigation started with a young woman from Florida, from the Miami area, who basically had to endure an incredible situation in terms of how aggressive RentACenter was in terms of trying to collect on a $60 overdue bill. What would you tell people?
Well, I think people are intimidated when they sign contracts. The salesperson says, here's the contract, sign it, it's all standard language. Well, it's not. And if you read this contract and if you don't understand it, there's nothing wrong with adding yourself the representations that were made by the salesperson. You know, put it in language that you understand. It's plain and simple. These contracts are designed a lot of times to obfuscate the issue. And at all times, you should try and find something for free. There are resources out there, you know, freeware, churches, the Salvation Army has furniture vouchers, friends, you can reach out, you know, if you're moving into a place, maybe the person that's leaving has furniture, so you should try and stay away from it.
But Brian, these businesses are in business for a good reason. People are turning to them when they need a new TV or appliance. How often do you get complaints, if it's not just about RentACenter, but other similar renter-owned companies?
Well, in the rent-own industry, BBB receives thousands of complaints. Consumers are complaining to us, and our goal is to help consumers through that process, develop information so they can come to us, and that's the key here, is consumers need to do their homework, their research first, before they make any buying decision when it comes to companies. And then in a case like this, they need to compare their options. This may be the only option, but there are other options. There's layaway options now, there's potentially financing through retail stores, and just understanding the costs at the end game of this.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you very much. FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And just a reminder, if you want to stay up to date on the latest local breaking news and see all the alerts on your phone instantly, iPhone and iPad users, you will need to download our new news app. Just go to the App Store and search for WWSB or My Suncoast. Android users, you have nothing to worry about. You're going to get it anyway, automatically. We want to thank both our guests for being here tonight, Brian Oglesby of the Better Business Bureau and Jerry Zivick, our consumer watchdog.